Holy moly. Hello, hello, hello. I am so sorry if you were waiting for me to open up this live. I don't know what happened, but I've spent the last 40 minutes trying to get this up and going. And finally, after reboot, we're finally here. So now I do have to do one very, very quick thing because I didn't think this was going to work. And I had told somebody that it would be later this evening. So if you just bear with me for half a second, I am going to just go in and make a status change here. And then we will get started. So today we are going to be talking about line. And um, while I'm working on this piece that I started last week, which is a vision board, and I have to admit I haven't done a lot with it since. Um, so just very quickly, just to show you, this is what is being done on it, and what has been done on it, and I've got a whack of other stuff that I want to add to it, layers upon layers of stuff. Um, I'm going to turn off my phone just so that nobody interrupts me. And we're ready to go. So I'm going to actually angle the camera down onto the work because you don't need to look at me while we're it's more interesting to sort of watch what I'm doing. Yeah, so I'm going to do a series of talks that focus on. Okay, bear with me. That focus on the elements and principles of art. Oops, sorry, don't let me make you sick here. All this movement. I have to sort of balance up precariously. There, I think that's it. There we go. Okay. Yes, that deal with the elements and principles of art. And oh. And yeah, so we are going to start with line. And line is basically any continuous movement. So this is a line. This is a line. This is a line. Like almost anything you put onto your canvas, your paper, or whatever your substrate is that you're working with, will make a line. A dot is a form of a line. But generally, a line has movement to it. So a dot that you make like this, and especially if you can see the, if you're using like a pencil versus a paint marker, although even a paint marker could do it. But anyway, if you I'm gonna turn my volume off my speaker too, so you don't get notifications dinging. Yeah, so anything a line that makes a mark basically is going to, it's going to give you a line. A line that makes a mark is going to give you a line. That makes sense, doesn't it? And just bear with me for one more second. You'd think with all this extra time I'd be more organized, but actually I'm less because I was letting my frustration catch in. So, and there's different types. There are different types of lines as well. So there are lines that that emphasize things. So if you think of, let me think if I can. So if I took I'm actually going to do this as we go. I'll show you on this. Whoops, my water. I'll show you on this piece that I'm working on, for example. And give me half a second, because this part wasn't planned at all. But so say, for example, say, for example, I just took this pencil crayon and I go around this outline here. And basically that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to outline this general shape. And you probably can't see this very well. Move this water. You probably can't actually see this very well. But I've basically outlined it. Okay, so that's like a contour line or an emphasizing line. And what that does is that actually defines a shape. Right? So and what this does is it helps to sort of identify or bring a bit more focus to the piece. So when you think about say famous paintings and you think of a say a woman sitting down or something, then and you see that the actual figure has been outlined and maybe her arm is outlined a little bit, that kind of a thing, then you will that those are all contour lines and they just give a bit more of a defined shape. They help to separate one object from another, like her arm from her body, for example, that kind of a thing. Here outlining this, now I've done this very subtly based on the medium that I chose, but if I was to take that and do that with say this green marker, and I was outline it in green versus the purple that I outlined it in earlier, right? It stands out a lot more. This now, well, partly for a number of reasons, but this stands out more than this, for example, partly because of the colors chosen, the purple versus the pink, but partly because it's outlined. And this has more definition from the background than this does, than this does, than this does. So just by adding one line around it, you've given it a different sort of importance. So, that's one style of line. And sometimes your lines can be, so if you think of how can I do this with this piece? I won't show you this piece. I'll show you in a different piece. I'll show you this piece. So in this piece, for example, there are still lines. Okay? This is a piece that I started a couple of weeks ago that I haven't gone back to yet. But, here's a line. Here's a line. In each of these little flecks, there's a line. Here's a line. Here's a line. Here's a line. But there's all kinds of lines within this piece. They're not drawn. They're not painted. They're just made with paper. But they're all individual lines. Wherever there's a fold over, there's a line. And you can de-emphasize a line. So here we emphasized it, but you can de-emphasize it as well by basically blending more and more. So if I was to take this and take this edge here, for example, and add a bit more yellow to the edge there, versus other parts of it, then you'll start to see that it becomes a little bit more less emphasized because it's blending in more with this background. So you'll often see that in landscapes in particular, because say like your horizon, it's not a straight line, right? That you see, it's not a solid line. It's not differentiated by a line like this sort of idea was. And so it's sort of a de-emphasized sort of a line. So, you know, those just sort of just like two almost opposing feelings or thoughts that you can have around line. You know, one that gives more structure, one that gives less structure, one that emphasizes something, one that de-emphasizes something. So that's just a sort of an example of, you know, what you can do with stuff. Now I'm just going to add on a little bit of these scraps of paper here in random places as we continue. So if you want to know more about this piece that I'm working on, there was a video that we did when I first started it that talked a lot about vision boards and sort of how I see them versus maybe how they might be seen a bit more in the mainstream. And neither way is better than the other. They're just slightly different variations on the same thing. What I'm using just to sort of put this down is a bit of tapioca paste, which you can make on your own, but I've bought this tapioca paste. I bought this at the Japanese paper place in Toronto, and I just love it because it dries clear. There's not much of a sheen to it. Whoops, I should capture it here. There somehow. Yeah, and it just sticks. It doesn't harm the paper. It doesn't, you know, make the paper go these sort of a weird. Oops, that's extra. This stage that I'm at with this particular piece is I'm literally building up layers of things that I want to create. I want a place to add some messages, so I'm actually literally gluing paper down that I can then write all over. And what I love about these papers is that, as you can see, they're somewhat translucent, so the idea of what was behind it is still coming through. Tiny little bit here. So another thing that line can do is show movement. So in this piece, for example, I mean, right now it's a hodgepodge of movement, and depending on where you're, you know, it's actually taking your eye everywhere because this isn't a piece. This is just the underlying nature of the piece. But for example, all of this here, these lines here are giving you movement that go this way. These lines here are giving you movement that goes sort of this way, but also then a little bit this way. Whoops, sorry, I'm looking at this backwards. But like this way. Over here, you've got some more lines that go that way. Up here, you've got, you know, lines that are coming this way, right? So there's lines here going like every which way. Then you've got another layer, and you've got like this almost arrow shape that's pointing you, it's bringing your focus into here. Now, if all of these lines ended up focusing in towards this idea, then you'd end up with movement in your whole piece that draws your eye to a central focus, even if it's very subtly, like by these broken lines, right? Which, of course, like I say, isn't the case right now because of, you know, it being a background. But in most works of art, you want a line that's actually you want something that's going to actually draw your the viewer's eye. It might you know, have it go around the whole piece, but ultimately will land on what it is that the artist wants you to focus upon. And so in doing that, and you can do that in a number of different ways. It doesn't all have to be, and we'll talk about this more as we get into some of the different elements of art. It doesn't all have to be in, with my keyboard, so keep leaning on it. It doesn't all have to be in from a single line, for example, like from a drawn line. It could be from the use of negative space. Could be from the use of color. Could be the use of texture. Like there's a number of different ways that you can give the idea of movement. Let me take this one and I'm going to lay this up here. Let me just grab these edges. I'm going to try to make sure I have the edges glued down fairly well, but although again, there's going to be other layers on top of this, so it's not absolutely vital at this point. But I do like to generally try to glue them down as best I can. Oops. I don't have on my art shirt today. Usually I've got about three shirts, but particularly this old sort of really baggy green one that I have that's already covered in paint and handprints and stuff like that. And I tend to wear that one a lot because it's cool. It sort of has a cotton base to it. And consequently, you'll probably see me in a lot of different videos talking about different things. And it seems like I'm always wearing the same shirt, but that's why, because it's my favorite art shirt. What I'm using right today is not super messy, but I just didn't stop to think about changing what I was wearing either. So, we were talking about movement in art. We were talking about movement within your piece. So the other thing is, you have movement that goes like here. The movement takes you off the edge of the canvas, right? So often art will do that. It'll either draw you in from the edges, or sometimes it'll push you out from the central point of view. And sometimes the exact same line can have one person look in, another person look out. So, but generally, generally there's an intent. Excuse me. From the artist themselves. But we know that not always, excuse me, not always is the what the artist has in mind is not always what happens to the in the mind of the viewer. I need to put a couple of these sorts of things on. I'm just going to take one of these leaves from this series of 3 for the moment. I'm going to put this in here like that. I'm going to leave that wire there, and I'm not going to attach it. I'm not going to tack it down or anything. I'm going to leave it loose because I have an idea of what I might want to do with that afterwards. Okay, so I put those 2 on. Put this watering can. Whoops. Put this watering can down as well, I think. Actually, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna bring this. I'm gonna build this up. Okay. Sorry, this is just the way that my mind works. So I have this watering can. I have this flower here and this flower here. And this is going to put it flat, but that puts it almost underneath this watering can, underneath this flower. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to actually build up something in here and then raise this up so that it looks like it's actually going to be watering on top of the flowers rather than underneath it. That was where my mind just went. So I just thought I'd share that with you. I'm just looking at some of these things that I have that I want to get in here. Oh, I've got these dragonflies too. I wonder, I'm just going to double check something here because I have a feeling that if I turn off this, I don't know, I'm just going to a different screen for a second. I don't know if you still see what's happening here. I think you do. So I just want to read up quickly because I don't tend to remember them all in one sentence sort of thing. But basically, so the elements of art are like line, shape, form, space, texture, value, and color, which I always remember, but not always in that order. And then the principles of art, which we'll get into down the road, are things that bring you more. It's not the individual aspects of it, but it's more the whole idea, the whole feeling behind the piece itself, sort of as a way of expression, maybe. And those include things like balance, contrast, emphasis, movement, which line helps make movement. All the elements work towards the principles. So the principles of art, are like balance, contrast, emphasis, movement, pattern, rhythm, and unity. And so we'll be going over each of those as well. It's funny, the first time that I learned about these was back in the 80s when I found myself teaching art, and I had to learn, like I didn't even know there were elements, principles of art. So that's how green I was. And when you do different exercises, and you start thinking about, well, how is line going to, say, so from this piece, for example, how am I going to use the element of line to give emphasis, to give weight, to give unity? Like I say, if this was like a finished piece now, it would be like it's like a dog's breakfast. If you look at, especially if you look at just the idea of line, because like color, there's more unity, right? We've got yellow here, and we've got brought in some yellow here, and there's some yellow over here. We've got greens. We don't have a lot of purple yet, but because we took the paint, like I took this roller, and I actually went through these puddles of paint, and that's what made all these sort of variegated lines of different colors, because I actually went through the paint and rolled out a pseudo texture doing that. So that helped bring the color from one area into another area. And then I picked up sort of on the greens, that sort of thing in here, sort of the bluey greens. This is a bit more green, but it also plays into this green here. I brought, there's a little bit of green here, but it's a slightly different green. There's more green over here. So, in terms of color, there's a lot more cohesion, right? But in terms of line, it's like a dog's breakfast, because, this paper line goes with this way, this one goes this way, this one goes this way. That's just paper. Then we've got, this one, which really stands out because it's so much darker than everything else. So there's, a little bit of value there in terms of color. We've got, obviously the lines like from the roller, we've got all kinds of lines that way. We've got lines even within this piece here that sort of go all over the place. The textures within the paint here create other lines. And really it's kind of like a throw up of line. So, and the lines don't lead anywhere except for maybe off the canvas. So in my humble opinion, this is like, this would never be a finished piece of art as it stands now, because it doesn't have any central, like, you don't know what to look at, right? Um, so when I think of line, I often think of, what do I want the central, I mean, when I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about a piece, when I'm designing it, I think, what is the central idea or feeling or theme or object that I want everything to focus on? And then it's like looking at the elements of art and say, well, how can I use, you know, the different elements of art to put the attention of the viewer where it is I want it to be in the piece. And then, sometimes you want it just to stay there, but ultimately you want the viewer's eye to sort of move around a little bit, and then you know land somewhere where there's going to be a little bit more definition, perhaps, or a bit more of an emphasis, to get that real feeling of the art, um, across to the viewer. So, um, just going to pull up a note here that I made about something about. Just going to give you an example here. Oops. There we go. That's what I wanted. So when you think about, line as well, so you can think about the direction of the line, right? You can also think about the thickness of the line or the heaviness. So like this piece here, for example, even though it's paper, doesn't really matter if it was paper or paint or pastel or whatever. But because the line is created, it's created with color, it's created with objects, that are obviously going in a direction. These are all going in the same direction. They're not going higgledy-piggledy all over. So it's emphasizing the line that way. Um, uh, it's a separate piece as well. It's been added on. It's got layer. So there's it's thicker than, say, this line is. So it's more, there's more volume sort of thing there. So when you think about line, you think about, if you're going to do, let's take this, for example, and I'm just going to take the back of this envelope. So, for example, this is a line. This is a line. It's actually a lot of lines put together, right? This has more emphasis than this has. This has more weight than this has. This one you can barely see. I'll show you closer, but whoops. Right? You can barely see it. This is a line. Okay? But this line which of these two lines in your mind has more, this one or this one, is gonna draw your attention more when you're looking at them? Is it this one that's, even though it's shorter, is more solid, is a bit deeper in color? Is it this one that's longer and maybe has some movement to it? This one gets lost. This one got lost against this one, let alone when you add this one, right? So, how is it, but there are points when this line is the line that you want to use. You don't want this one or this one, because it's going to detract from something else that you're doing. So you really have to think about it in terms of, how you're going to use all of the elements together in your planning. Now, in a piece like this, quite frankly, the bottom layers, I'm not really doing a lot of planning. I'm just doing, oh, I have this object, I have that object. Some objects I know I want on the top layers. Some might want to have peeking out from other layers. Like, I've got three, I've got a whole whack of dragonflies, but I'm going to use three in this piece. Well, one I want to put on the bottom layer. So, how do I want that dragonfly to look? How, what am I going to put in and around it? Am I going to have it sort of, land on part of that flower, for example? Am I going to have it peek out as it's flying out from underneath that leaf? Am I going to have it just literally sit on top of this flower over here? What is it that I want this dragonfly to do? I mean, the thing about a dragonfly, just by its very name and nature, gives a sense of movement, right? Just by the shape of the dragonfly, it gives movement. If I put the dragonfly this way versus this way, then your eye is going to go in a different direction because the dragonfly itself is leading you, leading your eye towards something. So what is it that I want what is it that I want the viewer to see, and how can I use this dragonfly to have the eye move? That's getting away from the line. I apologize. I'm sort of jumping ahead of several things, but we were talking about movement, and that's why I sort of went that way. Yeah. So basically, those are the and we're talking about movement. So the thing about movement is there's something called an axis line, and an axis line is the same sort of idea if you're looking at math, right? It's sort of this, these lines that intersect. So you might have things that go against that are here, and you might have so say, for example, I'm just thinking one of the easiest analogies that I can think of has to do with landscape. So say you've got landscape, here you've got maybe a whole whack of land, and maybe it's on the edge of a pond, and then here you've got some pond, and then up here you've got the sky. So you've got three different areas that maybe not be clearly defined in terms of a line. It's not like you've drawn a line here. Okay, now here's all the land, and all here's the water, and all here's the sky. But you're sort of but when you look at the piece, you look at three sort of separate ideas, right? So those are sort of axis lines. But maybe you've got the sun, and the sort of the rays or the light from the sun are coming down on an angle this way. Well, this gives you sort of an axis line. It's basically, where these lines are leading your eye, and where they may intersect. So if I've got these three lines here, and then I've got the sun up here, and the sun is giving you rays of light that are drawing your eye down this way, and then maybe I've got tree lines up here, and I've got taller trees up here, then your eye is going to sort of fall here. It's going to fall into this area because the trees here are going to stop your eye from going any further. Okay. The sun is up here. It's the rays are bringing your eye down into this direction. So chances are this is going to become your focus. Now that's all done very subtly, and looking at some of the different axis lines within your piece. So I always say think of an axis like you would, in math or a graph or something, where you've got, here's your y-axis and here's your x-axis, and you draw a graph. You've got your lines going different, going in different directions, and then where is it that the lines are going to take you? That's sort of the same sort of idea in terms of a work of art. So that's another sort of a line. And then you've got lines like in sculptures, for example, which are totally different and yet the same as they are in paintings. So you've got sort of a contour line just by its very nature because of the the medium that you're working with. Because it's a three-dimensional object versus a two-dimensional, right? So, this is a line. There's sort of four lines sort of here, which give you the idea. Whereas a sculpture, you've looked at this as a piece of sculpture, for example. Well, then, it's got much more of a clearly defined contour line to it, right? So, but the same thing happens in sculpture, is that the way the sculpture is created is still going to bring the eye into a central point, so to speak, like a point of emphasis. It's still going to have movement. If you think of some of the classic sculptures, the way they use the draping of the quote fabric, i.e., rock or marble, but there's these folds of fabric, or the way the fabric is draped over the body, all give a sense of movement, and give our the way that line is used to differentiate the one thing from another. So those are just some very super basic ideas about line. And as we move into things, you'll see more and more of that, and you'll see more and more especially as the elements all come together one on top of the other, how they'll all be used in order to emphasize different principles of art. You don't have to use every element of art or every principle of art in every piece. You generally don't. You generally use, you might emphasize one or the other. Like you might use line a lot in one piece to emphasize what it is that you're trying to get across, or you might use color, or you might use, depending what it is. And you might use a couple of them. Like I tend to use color and texture a lot, because those are the two things that I'm drawn to as an artist, as I'm drawn to also as a viewer. So that's why I tend to use them, because I personally vibe with them more. So you sort of need to figure out what it is for you, either as the viewer or the artist, and sometimes the medium itself will help you decide that. So that's where I'm going to stop today. I didn't get very far in this piece, but that's where I'm going to sort of stop today. And like I say, we'll revisit a lot of this as we move forward, and hopefully that'll give you a little bit of an insight as to how line is used as an element of art. Okay, thanks guys, and I will see you next week. Bye.